Hi folks, HR Funk here. Back once again with an ammunition efficacy assessment, or AEA, which is what I've decided to call these videos moving forward. And once again, this video comes about as a result of one of you who requested it. This time around it was Shane, who sent me an email a week or so ago and asked me if I would test some 45 ACP loads using the method that I featured recently in some previous videos, where I'm firing bullets into water-filled jugs and then using the conversion formula developed by Dick Fairburn to convert the results we see in water to an approximation of what we could have expected with those same bullets if they had been fired into calibrated 10% ballistic gel. And once again, Shane was good enough to provide the ammunition for this test. Everyone say thank you to Shane, and I want to add my own thanks as well. A couple of days ago, I received a box from UPS that came from Target Sports USA. It had several different types of 45 ACP ammunition inside, and in this video, we're going to take a look at the results I was able to obtain with that ammunition. So here we go. So the 45 ACP loads I'm going to be testing today, in order from lightest to heaviest bullets, are the 185 grain Winchester Silver Tip, kind of a classic loading in 45 ACP there. Also something new from Federal, the Federal 205 grain Syntech round. This is a hollow point bullet with a synthetic coating or jacket, if you will. It kind of reminds me of the old Nyclad ammunition, but the coating or the jacket, whatever the material is, I think is something other than nylon. I'm not sure exactly what it is, something synthetic. Also, this ammunition I had here on hand, and I wanted to try it along with the others that I'm testing. This is some 230 grain Federal HydraShok ammo that was probably manufactured somewhere in the mid-2000s, 2005-ish. I'm basing that just on the package design mostly. Also from Federal, the Federal 230 grain Tactical HST. And I was intending to test some Federal 230 grain hardball ammo, but due to circumstances beyond my control, I was not able to test this. I'll explain what happened as we make our way through the video. The handgun I'm using for all the testing you're about to see is my Smith & Wesson M&P 45 2.0, and this pistol has a 4.6-inch barrel. And the reason I chose this one is because I was going back and forth in my mind, do I want to use a commander length barrel of about 4 1/4 inches, or do I want to use a full-size government length barrel about 5 inches? And I decided to go with the M&P because it's pretty much right in between. Now I know for all you math majors out there, 4.6 inches is not exactly between 4 1/4 inches and 5 inches, but I don't think the variance of 25 1/1000ths of an inch is going to make that much difference. Anyway, I also don't have a handgun chambered in 45 ACP with a barrel length shorter than 4 1/4 inches. So I don't have a Smith & Wesson Shield or something like that that's got a 3.5-inch barrel or something along those lines. But I thought using this handgun with this barrel length would give us results close enough that you could sort of extrapolate either way if you're using a full-length 5-inch barrel or if you're using a shorter commander length barrel. If you're using something shorter than that, you might have to conduct some of this testing on your own. And again, I said this before in one of these videos, the reason I'm using this method and putting it out there for all of you is because you can test your own ammunition from your own firearms and see what kind of performance you're getting. And if you don't like what you're getting, you can try some other different types of ammunition to get something that's going to be more along the lines and meeting your expectations. So real quick, before we start to look at some test results, I want to talk for just a moment about my methodology. Now, if you've seen some of the previous videos I've made in this series, you pretty much know what to expect. When I got out to the range, the first thing I did was set up my chronograph, and I fired 3 rounds of each of these loads over the chronograph to establish an average velocity from the M&P 45. Then I fired 1 round of each into the water jugs. You're going to be able to see the video footage of that as it happened. You'll be able to see where I was looking through the jugs after firing the shot to find out exactly where the bullet ended up. Then we'll come back here to the shop and talk about the results. So now it's time to head out to the range. I decided to test these bullets once again in order from lightest bullet to heaviest bullet. So when we get out there, the first up is going to be the 185 Winchester Silver Tip. Let's go see how it did. I think that is the most unexpected result I have ever seen in one of these tests. That silver tip bullet went through 1 jug, 2 jugs, 3 jugs, 4 jugs, 5 jugs, 6 jugs, 7 jugs, and it might have gone out through number 8. That bullet is gone, folks. So apparently there was no expansion whatsoever with that Winchester Silver Tip hollow point. I expected just the opposite. I thought it was going to be very shallow penetrating, just like the 9mm silver tip, but it was not. So here are the results, such as they are, with that Winchester Silver Tip load. And as I mentioned out at the range, I have never seen a Winchester Silver Tip of any caliber perform like this before. Normally what we see is very rapid expansion with those and shallow penetration. But this is a great reminder that bullets don't always perform exactly the same every time. Just because you've seen a certain type of performance in a video or in manufacturer's testing or whatever, that does not mean every bullet from that manufacturer in that load is always going to perform exactly the same. Once in a while, we'll get some errant performance, which is what we see here. So there are no guarantees that just because you purchase brand X with bullet Y, that it's always going to perform exactly the same as every other cartridge with that bullet has performed. Once in a while, you see something strange. And that's exactly what we have here. When I tested this load over my chronograph, the average velocity was 912 feet per second. That's a little below Winchester's spec for this load. They show this load has an average velocity of 1,000 feet per second. Now I was firing it out of that 4.6-inch barrel. Had I been firing it from a 5-inch barrel, we would have probably seen closer to 1,000 feet per second. So it's not too far off here, but it is a little low. When I look at the results, what I'm going to have to say here is the bullet was in excess of what I was able to calculate. That bullet passed completely through 8 water jugs, which is equal to 48 inches of water. I'm not able to show any of the terminal additions, so again, it's just going to be in excess of this. When we use the conversion formula, that would have been in excess of almost 31 inches of 10% calibrated ballistic gel. So I'm certain there was no expansion of this bullet whatsoever. It just zipped right on through there and kept on going. Again, very, very unusual for a Winchester Silver Tip, but it's a good reminder that you can have strange things happen with bullets, even one that's been in production as long as this one has. So now let's head back out to the range and we'll take a look at the performance of the 205 grain Federal Syntech load. That Syntech bullet felt awfully light as far as the recoil is concerned. The bullet went through 1 jug, 2 jugs, 3 jugs, 4 jugs, 5 jugs, and it's in jug number 6 and broke the back of jug number 7. And not surprisingly, there is 0 expansion for this bullet. And here is that bullet from the Federal Syntech. This is actually Syntech Defense ammunition from Federal. And before I start to talk about the performance you saw in the video, I have to talk a little bit about some of the things that happened before I even got to that point with this ammunition. From Federal, the Syntech Defense 205 grain 45 ACP has a rated velocity of 970 feet per second. So let that sink in for a second. It's supposed to be coming in probably from a 5-inch barrel, at just under 1,000 feet per second. When I fired the first load, or the first bullet I should say, from this load over my chronograph, it had a velocity of 623 feet per second. So 300 and almost 50 feet below where it should have been registering for the factory velocity. The next cartridge had a velocity of 847 feet per second, and the third cartridge was 817 feet per second. So I thought that the first cartridge that I fired must have resulted in a bad chronograph reading. So I decided to fire one more, and I was going to delete the first velocity. That cartridge had a velocity of 563 feet per second, and in fact it was so light that the cartridge case did not eject from the pistol. And I don't think I've ever had a stoppage of any kind with this handgun before, and I could even tell from the recoil that that was a very light 45 ACP load. So I don't know if this is a bad lot of this ammunition or if this is representative of this ammunition in general, but the velocities were very erratic and some of them were very, very low. Next, this bullet, when it's fired into a fluid medium, is supposed to fragment. The bullet tip is supposed to break into 3 different pieces, and they are supposed to go off in different directions and form secondary wound cavities. Obviously, due to the lack of velocity, we saw no expansion, no fragmentation, and again, this penetrated far deeper than it should have for defensive ammunition. The average velocity, when I figured in the 2 errant low velocities along with those 800 plus velocities that I got, came out to 712 feet per second. But again, keep in mind, one time you might get 847 feet per second. The next time you might get 500 and whatever I said before, 23 or something like that, 563. So this was a light load. Once again, I could tell from the recoil when I fired this, there just was not much oomph behind this bullet. So it did not expand, it did not fragment, and in fact, it over-penetrated. I found the bullet in jug number 6. It broke jug number 7. So it gets credit for 30 inches of penetration plus 8 inches for the terminal addition. That comes up to 38 inches of penetration in water. With the conversion factor, that gives us an approximate penetration in 10% calibrated ballistic gel of 24.5 inches. So way, way too deep for defensive ammunition. Again, I'm certain that's because of low velocity, not high velocity, and a failure to expand or fragment at all. The recovered diameter was essentially the same as the beginning diameter, 454 1/1000 of an inch, and the recovered weight was essentially exactly the same, 204.3 out of 205 grains. Folks, if this is representative of this ammunition, I would not carry this stuff. In fact, I'm not going to. I'll use the rest of this box of ammunition for punching holes in paper, but I will not be carrying this for defensive purposes. You might recall earlier in the video I mentioned that I was intending to test 230 grain hardball ammunition as part of this evaluation, but because of the number of water jugs that were used up by the Syntech defense and the Winchester Silver Tip load, I did not have enough out there to be able to test that 230 grain ball load. So I had to delete that from the test. I'll have to do that at some point in the future, but I wanted to make sure that I got all of the defensive ammunition in as part of this assessment. So now it's time to head back out to the range and take a look at the one classic cartridge that I had in this test. This is going to be the 230 grain Federal HydraShok that I mentioned earlier in the video, was probably produced somewhere around 2005. Let's go see how it did. That HydraShok bullet went through 1 jug, 2 jugs, it's in jug number 3 and put a serious dent in jug number 4, but it's not broken. And there's our HydraShok bullet. So finally, we saw some good defensive performance with the classic 230 grain Federal HydraShok. When I got to the range and tested this over my chronograph, I ended up with an average velocity for 3 rounds of 849 feet per second. That's a little lower than the factory rated velocity of 900 feet per second, but at the factory they probably tested this out of a 5-inch test barrel, and out of the 4.6-inch barrel of my M&P I came up with just shy of 850 feet per second, and I am fine with that for a 230 grain bullet. I think that's going to be adequate to facilitate effective performance, and that's pretty much exactly what we saw. When I fired this bullet into the water jugs, I recovered it from jug number 3, meaning it completely penetrated 2 jugs for 12 inches of penetration, plus it marked the front of jug number 4, so that gives it credit for an additional 7.5 inches, for a total of 19.5 inches of penetration in water. When we plug that into the conversion formula, that would give us an approximate penetration depth in calibrated 10% ballistic gel of just over 12.5 inches. So that is very, very good performance. That's pretty much right where we want to see this. Beyond that, when we look at the bullet itself, which by the way, once this focuses, still has a piece of the plastic jug stuck onto the end of it. But this bullet has an expanded diameter of 0.665 inches, so over 66 caliber, and a retained weight of 225 grains, so almost 100% weight retention. That is very, very good performance for a bullet that was first developed back during the 1980s. So not bad at all. If you've still got some of this classic 230 grain HydraShok ammo, I think you've got pretty good defensive ammunition. So now, last but certainly not least, let's head back out to the range and we'll take a look at the Federal 230 grain Tactical HST, and we'll see how it did, and we'll also be able to see how it compared to its older cousin, the HydraShok. Actually, the HST stands for HydraShok Technology, so the HST was actually developed from the HydraShok over time. So that's interesting. Let's see how much better, if any, it actually does. So the HST went through 1 jug, 2 jugs, 3 jugs, and broke the back of number 4. But it is in jug number 3. And there's that beautiful expanded bullet. Folks, it seems like every time I test Federal HST, regardless of what cartridge or what caliber, it always performs very, very impressively. When I got to the range and I tested the velocity, I came up with an average of 877 feet per second. The factory rating is 890. Once again, a little bit lower, not much, probably because I'm shooting this out of a handgun with a shorter barrel. When I fired this bullet into the water, I recovered it from jug number 3, so it completely penetrated 2 jugs for a total of 12 inches. It also broke the front of jug number 4, so that gives it an additional 8 inches worth of penetration credit for 20 inches penetration in water. Plugging in the conversion factor, that would give us an approximate penetration depth in calibrated 10% ballistic gel of just shy of 13 inches. Now, as you recall, the HydraShok had a penetration of about 12.5. I think it was 12.58 inches would have been our approximation with the older bullet. that this one was developed from. So this penetrated a little bit deeper, not a lot, but a little bit. But what really is impressive is when we look at that penetration and we compare it to the expansion of this bullet, which is tremendous. This bullet expanded to almost 85 caliber, 0.849 inches, and still penetrated to 13 inches. That is just amazing, amazing performance from this Federal HST. And it had essentially 100% weight retention. So that is outstanding performance. It did pass up the HydraShok. Now, as I said, the HydraShok is not a bad load. And if you're still carrying that, I think you have good defensive ammunition. But the HST did improve on that performance. Now, one more time, I want to emphasize a couple of things. First off, just as I said when I was talking about the Winchester Silver Tip, there could be a circumstance where you don't get this type of performance from your Federal HST, or from the HydroShock for that matter. So don't pin all your hopes and dreams on one shot that's going to perform just like this and do just what you need it to get yourself out of a bad situation. Also, as I've said many, many, many times, there is no magic bullet. Shot placement is going to trump bullet performance every single time. If you have a bullet that performs like this, but it strikes somebody in the tip of the little finger, that's probably not going to stop them. If you have a 22 rimfire that doesn't expand at all, but it center punches them right through the heart or goes through an eye orifice and straight into the brain, that might end the problem right there, even though that bullet doesn't perform anything like this. That's why you need to make sure you're always practicing and keeping your marksmanship skills up to snuff. In any case, I think when we rate our bullets from today's test, I will line them up in order of their performance, at least the ones that I can line up, and then we'll start to wrap things up. So here are the bullets from today's test, and I had to put an actual loaded cartridge here to represent the Silver Tip since I did not have a bullet to recover. And I might have to test this stuff again at some point in the future. Maybe there was just something about that bullet that I fired, but that was definitely not very good defensive performance from that one that I used during this video. The 205 Syntech defense, as I said before, I would just not use this stuff. I am not impressed by that at all, with that variation that I was seeing in velocity and the fact that we got no bullet performance whatsoever. I would not use that stuff. In fact, like I said, I'm just going to use it for punching holes in paper moving into the future. I think the HydroShock acquitted itself quite well for a bullet that was designed a long time ago. I think that's still an effective cartridge. And the winner of today's assessment was definitely this Tactical HST. Again, look at that. That is just amazing. And keep in mind that these pedals have now bent backwards at some point. As this bullet was moving, those were straight out to the side, meaning the diameter of this bullet was even greater than it is at this point. There you go, folks. That's going to do it for my 45 ACP Ammunition Efficacy Assessment, or AEA. Once again, I want to say thank you to Shane for providing the ammunition for this test. Without his assistance, this video would not have been possible. Also, before I go, another quick plug for my website. Stop by hrfunk.com, check out the news and events page to find out all the things that are going on with me and the channel, and go by the product information page to look for the links there to manufacturers whose products I've reviewed here on the channel recently. And there's some information under those links that will save you some money if you decide to purchase any of those products. See you next time, folks. And until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.